Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for coming out to the second in a series of tea talks that's sponsored by the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail and the Seacoast African American Culture Center. Before we get started with our program today, I'd like to introduce the Executive Director of the Portsmouth Historical Society, and that's Kathleen.
Kel, thank you so much. And I just was realizing that the baby in there was one of our speakers. So, if any babysitters, right, need any help during the panel. But thank you so much for being here today and coming out in the cold. I so appreciate this, and I was so thrilled last week with the opener, the first tea talk, standing room only. It was just it was so great to see what magnetic programming SAC and Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail are doing. I absolutely love it, and obviously 4 more to come. I just wanted to mention just a couple of things that if you haven't already, if you are not already a member, it would be great if you wanted to sign up. If you don't want to take that step, please sign up for e-news. Just go on portsmouthhistory.org. We send a weekly e-news out every Thursday to let people know what's going on the weekend, whether it's things that are happening here or happening all over town with respect to history, arts, and culture. So, and I think I just wanted to mention that because of a grant that we get from TD Bank, all admissions to all tea talks are complimentary. So, because of their desire to have things, accessible programming for the public. So, thank you again for being here, and enjoy.
Thank you, Kathleen. So, tea talk today is church, faith, and the New Hampshire community, the Black woman's perspective. And I would like to, before introducing the panel, just have a few comments to say about Black women and the Black church. Traditionally, the Black church has been supported very heavily by the Black woman. You might say the Black woman is the backbone of the Black church. And I think women in the Black church have had somewhat of a difficult struggle when it comes to equality. I think inequality of gender is and has been an issue for the Black church, particularly in the South. It doesn't seem to be quite the same here, even though there is, I think, some inequality. But in the South, women didn't play the roles of pastor. Generally, women could hold the role, the position of assistant pastor, where they would serve for a number of years. But in some organizations, it seemed to be sort of a dead-end career for them because they never could assume that full responsibility. In order to become a pastor, usually they would leave that church with a few of the members and start their own congregations. That perhaps isn't quite the same in this day and age, but historically I think that has been generally the way that women pastors progressed in their careers. So I would like now to introduce our panel. Reverend Lauren Smith, who is the co-pastor of the South Church, Minister Florine Hilson, who is the wife of Reverend Arthur Hilson, the pastor of New Hope Baptist Church here in Portsmouth, and Royaline Edwards, who is a PK, what we would normally refer to as a preacher's kid. So, and our third panelist is Nadine Thompson, who should be here shortly. And she's the wife of Reverend Robert Thompson, who is, I think, the chaplain at Phillips Exeter Academy in Exeter. So, and the way we'll proceed with the program this afternoon is that each panelist will have a period to speak and afterwards we'll have a question and answer period. So now I will make myself disappear and turn things over to our panels. We'll start with Reverend Smith, Mr. Hilson, then Mrs. Edwards. Thank you. Well, you could either, if you would like to use the podium, or I could bring the mic, especially since Lauren has a baby with her.
I'm a little bit shorter than Mr. Edwards. Thank you for, I didn't plan to bring the baby. My husband's car has a flat, so we improvised in the way that we do. So, but it's fun to have her here. My name is Lauren Smith. I am one of the ministers of South Church. I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister, and it's my great privilege and joy to serve in ministry. I think for a lot of reasons. Any number of reasons, which maybe we'll get to, but ministry is a unique privilege in that you get to walk with people in some of the most important moments of their lives, including in the day-to-day, in the way that the important things of life unfold in the day-to-day, and that's just really lovely. It's really an honor to serve in ministry. I'm also aware that Unitarian Universalism is a predominantly white religious tradition. There are lots of people of color. My great-great-grandfather was a black man and a Unitarian. So I'm a fifth generation black Unitarian, which is very, very unusual in Unitarian Universalist circles. But his story is that my family traveled out of North Carolina before the start of the Civil War, through Oberlin and into New England. So they're New Englanders from way back, and there were abolitionists who participated in the Underground Railroad, participated in the Black Civil War regiments, and so my family connected. I believe, from what I know, my family connected to Unitarianism through the very modest connection of Unitarian Universalism and black communities in the 19th century. I didn't go to church that much as a child, except when I was visiting my father in Oberlin, Ohio. I went to my grandmother and grandfather's church, Little Rust United Methodist Church, on Grove Street, and it was a sweet little small church, black church, in a small black neighborhood in Oberlin, Ohio, which is a liberal college town. So I loved that place, and I was loved there and known there. And the people who belonged to that church had loved and known me, loved and known my parents and my dad and my aunt all their lives too. So there's a way in which that place was a sort of a community center for me. When I was in college, and my grandparents were very, very active in that church. When I was in college, I came back every Thanksgiving, and I would go to visit my grandparents. And I remember early on, one Thanksgiving in the service, the minister made a homophobic remark, and I remember feeling shut off from this church that I had loved for so long, because it wasn't a superficial homophobic remark. It connected the purpose of the church with this homophobic statement, and I felt a little bit bereft at losing something, because I couldn't reconcile what was being said with this place that I loved and where I had been loved. So I went on kind of a search for a place, and my mother, who grew up Unitarian, said, "You would like the Unitarians, they're liberal." And so I went. And Unitarian Universalism is theologically liberal and politically liberal, and I found a theological home in Unitarian Universalism. Went to seminary, and now serve a Unitarian Universalist congregation. I have wrangled significantly. This is a very particular slice of this question about women, ministry, and Black communities. It's very much my own, and I don't know how much it will overlap with all of what emerges in the rest of the conversation. But so it has been rather an invisible struggle to look at what my ministry is, because paradigms of ministry in Black communities, there are distinctive paradigms of ministry in Black communities. The church holds a special place in the Black community. Preachers hold a special place in the Black community. So there's a paradigm of ministry that I hold deep in me, that is alive in me, and that I carry with me. There are paradigms of ministry in Unitarian Universalist settings and liberal, predominantly white Protestant settings. And Unitarian Universalism isn't a Protestant church, but a lot of its norms, culturally, it is most similar to liberal, Protestant, white churches. So the paradigms of ministry in those settings are also unique. And I hold a whole different paradigm that is alive in me, that is largely invisible to my congregation, and that exists in kind of creative tension and sometimes in conflict. That's been true as long as I've been in ministry. There's actually, I serve on a committee of Unitarian Universalist ministers who look at race in our tradition and cultural and how we can be more skillful in navigating all of those things in our tradition. And one of the things a project that emerged is that a book where a group of folks came together to write a book about ministry in predominantly white settings, because there are a lot of resources for people who are ministering cross-culturally. But usually they assume that the minister, the person in the place of power, is white, and they're serving a congregation of people of color. And so this flips that on its head, because there are all kinds of things that come up that are not necessarily visible. So my chapter's on worship. I'm writing a chapter for the book. What else do I want to say? I think the thing that I cherish most about the place of the church in Black communities and the place of the preacher in Black communities is the legacy on which I stand. So Black ministers have been forever, Black churches have been forever a binding force in the community, a place where people connect, a place where the community is grounded. Black preachers have been public theologians, have inspired people to activism, and have rallied around the issues, the social issues that affect our community. And I cherish that heritage. And I sometimes find it challenging to sort of navigate how to live into that heritage and take my place in it, because I feel responsible to it and accountable to it in the setting I'm in. And what's interesting and surprising is that moving to New Hampshire has opened a lot of that for me. It's been such a gift, in that in California, where I served before, I served a little congregation in San Mateo. It's a very diverse setting, and it's a little Unitarian church in San Mateo, which is out of San Francisco. But here in New England, we have these very old churches that are in the centers of town. So South Church is in the center of town, and that allows for some of that public presence to be possible. And also, there is a small and vibrant Black community here. And entering into relationship with this community, I have been extended lots of invitations to participate in things like this, to speak, and to be part of this community in the ways that Black ministers have been part of the community for ages. And it's been such a joy. It's been such a surprise. I suppose the last thing I'll say, and I'm trying to speak the right amount of time. I'm looking for Jerry Ann. 2 minutes, you say, probably more? Oh, okay. So when ministers in our tradition try to find a church, there's sort of like a Match.com dating process. We create something called a ministerial record, and we answer lots of questions. Congregations create a congregational record, and they answer lots of questions, and they post it publicly. And then we express our interest in them. And then once we've expressed our interest in them, they can look at our records. It's funny, but one of the questions is about what's called to ministry, and I had answered this question in my formation process for bodies of Unitarian Universalist kind of credentialing bodies. But my answer was, I'm called to serve at the intersection of Unitarian Universalism and black communities. And so then here I was trying to find a job, right, in Unitarian Universalism. We're captivated by South Church, which is in New Hampshire. And I thought, if I open my articulation of my call that way, will I be able to get a job? And so, I had written this whole thing that I was tweaking, and I wrote it. And then, we needed the job. We were brand new, we had a baby, and I took it out. And then I couldn't take it out because you can't take it out. Like, I couldn't take my identity out, I couldn't take my call to ministry out of, you can't do that, so I put it back. But I think that tension between the reality of working in the setting in which I work and some of the core pieces of my identity and the way I understand ministry and community have always existed in creative tension, and it's represented by that process of putting something in and taking it out and putting it back in again. So I think that's all. I guess I could say one more kind of example. One small thing. No, I won't do that. So it'll come up later. But that's a little bit about me and my journey into ministry. Yeah, there's more I'll say, but I'll say it later. Are you going to speak here? Or there?
For those of you out there that know me, you know that this is not a place that I like to be in. I'm the person in the background. And as I started thinking about what I was going to say and trying to figure out just how I got to be that person that always wanted to be in the background, I went back to that 5-year-old girl that had an experience that no 5-year-old should ever have. And as a result, I found myself going to church and feeling safe there. That was a place that I knew that no one would bother me as long as I was in church. So I went to Sunday school. I was at the 11 o'clock service. We ate dinner in between, and if there was a 3 o'clock service, I was there. If there was a 6 o'clock service, I was there because I was safe. And I grew up just loving church, just that good, safe feeling that I felt when I was at church. Never thought of marrying a preacher or a pastor, because that then took me out of that spot where I could hide in the congregation. Coming to New Hampshire was truly a life-changing experience for me. not only was I a young mother trying to navigate the whole, you have children that are in school and you need, but then there's this congregation that you're saying that I now have to be a part of, I have to be out in front of, and I wasn't comfortable with that. So I had to rely on that faith, that little girl. They say a child shall lead them. My little girl, my little child girl led me to where I could be more comfortable. I'm not there yet. I'm working on it. But more comfortable in the role that is placed upon the pastor's wife. The pastor's wife is seen to be the person that if no one else wants to do it, the pastor's wife does it. Thank God I don't play the piano, but those are some of the things that are thrust upon the pastor's wife. They expect the pastor's wife to be, they say, a bag of chips and more. I love being a part of the church. I love working in the church. And I don't see it as color because when I graduated from high school in 1969, there were 5 black students in a class of 100. So I'm accustomed to being in predominantly white areas. And as far as my faith, it's just that my faith that has allowed me to be comfortable among different races, different religions. I've taken classes, Hebrew classes at the synagogue. I've been known to go to Catholic masses because I serve a God that is a respecter of no person. I mean, we are all His children, and I try not to, and it's hard to not to, try not to look at religion as a color thing, because, forgive me, when we do that, I feel, and this is my personal feeling, you feel what you want, that's all right. I feel that we take God out of it. When we start separating ourselves based on color, then where is God in that? Where is the love that we're supposed to have for each other? Our faith is supposed to get us there, but there's no black faith, there's no white faith. Faith is faith, it's colorless. Faith is also an action word. Like I said, that little girl that had that experience, not knowing, I didn't have someone to say to me, because, back up, I also kept it to myself and didn't share it until recently, the experience that I had. But yet I was able to manipulate myself through church, through different services, to get to be the person that I am today. Speaking in front of people makes me nervous. Makes me nervous. My mouth is dry. But I guess sharing my story helps me. Thank you. Hands even shaking. Helps me to get past the feeling of the person that people tend to put down, but they don't know your story. They don't know where you came from. They don't know that you would feel more comfortable in the background because you don't want people to see what you view as shame although you didn't do anything, it wasn't your fault, but yet that's what it is. That's how you feel. In the church, I tried, people know I enjoyed holding your baby because I love children and I go to bat for children. And it's because of my experience that I find that I do that, that I'm able to show that love. I don't care whose child it is. If the child is crying, I want to comfort that child. I want to be there to give them that love that I feel they need. They say that, we're prominent black women. I feel myself as the least of these. I don't feel myself as anyone special. To put a label on that makes me feel uncomfortable, because then I feel like I have to live up to some expectations that that others have placed upon me that I don't feel comfortable with. I don't mean to make you all feel, I'm a happy person. Trust me, I am a happy person. I am. I watch my 3-year-old grandson 5 days a week, sometimes 6, 7 days a week. And I get down on the floor and play with him and stuff. I am a happy person. I am climbing out of the shadows and trying to step into where I feel God is leading me. Before I couldn't accept that. Now I can. And I heard something this morning that someone said that, as soon as you start giving God your all, that's when the devil starts in on you. And he's been riding my back for a long time, and I'm tired of him. But it's that kind of pressure, it's that kind of thing that keeps me striving to be the best Christian or servant that God would have me to be. Because it's not about denomination, that's man-made. It's about serving the people. Serving the people, God's people. Loving God's people. 8 to 80, giving them the best part of you that you can, and that's your love, your heart, your understanding. In my church, I sing in the choir, because it's singing in the choir that also helps me to disappear. And it's the words that really keep me. I listen to the words. I don't sing words that are empty. The words that I sing, they touch my heart, because I'm worried about my heart, and prayerfully it touches the person that hears the words. I'm also a part of the Sunday school, which like I said before, I grew up in the Sunday school. I may not get there every Sunday, because there's some Sundays that it's cold outside and the bed is warm, and it's hard to get moving. But that's my husband, that's my cue.
sisters. I feel like an interloper here. Far from it, but my father was a minister, and I grew up in the church. And many things that were said, I could identify with. And coming after my pastor's wife, whom I've known over almost 25 years, and we've worked together on some projects, and so here goes. When I was asked last week to step in, I was not sure about that because you can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Yes. I thought maybe I'd have to use my teacher's voice. And it's pretty big sometimes. But anyway, when I was asked to do this last week, I had to think about it for a while because, like Mrs. Hilson, I don't like to stand before a crowd either, unless it's a crowd of children. I love children, but I have adults here today, so I will try to act accordingly. My husband, he took some of my esteem. He read over my paper, so I'm going to have to skip a few things. Not really. But I just wanted to say, I write things down. I have to do that. I love writing and put my thoughts together. So these are my thoughts on paper. And I started out by saying, though wide the consensus in some quarters that the black church is the backbone of the community, it is common knowledge in most churches that were it not for women, not much would get done. And we women know that. And I think it has to do with the nurturing instinct that God gave us. Who did he give the privilege of having children? Women. So that instinct is there, and I'm sure for men too. We don't want to discriminate here, of course. And as my husband said, during the time that we were coming along, women were limited by the mores and traditions of the time. We do now see churches filled with women as pastors. In my church, no, women were not pastors. They couldn't get in the pulpit. That was a time, but times have changed. And I grew up in a Baptist church, by the way. And those of you who know about Baptist churches, we are very, we feel that there are certain rules and regulations that we abide by. But we feel that the most important thing in the Baptist, with reference to the Baptist church, as far as control and that kind of thing, is in the people. So we are very democratic in the Baptist church. Now, not all Baptist churches are the same. That's all I've known all my life is Baptist. And I've had an experience in Baptist churches but there are two things that all Baptist churches usually agree on, and that is baptism and our communion. We agree on those things and other things too, but that's primarily. But as I was growing up, I grew up in Georgia. And then we moved from Georgia to Tennessee, and from Tennessee to Columbus, Ohio. And when I moved to Columbus, Ohio, from those segregated states, you bring something with you of what segregation can do to you. Those of you who lived in segregated states had the experience of living in the South. And I had that experience. So every experience we have, it has something, it's sort of like, it adds something, either it can be a load on you or lift you. Of course, segregation did not lift you. It was a system that we know that of an inequality that had this, that would make its toll on children. So when I was young, I was very quiet and very shy. I was the third child, and in the family constellation, the third child has someone above and below. So you're kind of like in the middle, and sometimes you don't always get the recognition. So you just kind of hang back, And I used to hang back all the time. And what I loved doing was reading and writing and getting in my fantasy world. And because of that, people thought that, oh, she's like an introvert. She doesn't have much to say. Because right now I have too much to say. I used to, I found a pleasure in writing poems and stories. So when I went to Ohio, and I went to a predominantly white school, because in Columbus, Ohio, there was no segregation. Even though they would educate blacks, but there was still that you were still not accepted from the standpoint that you could get a job, any job you wanted, if you could go to any hotel. There were degrees of inequalities even in the North. And so when I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and my teachers were white, and that was a very, very different experience for me when I moved to Columbus, Ohio. And because down south, we were separated. Even though blacks and whites may have lived, in close proximity, there was still that separation. And when I got to school, I was a little, people had said, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, you have to be careful, But when I got there and I found out that I had 3 teachers that I remember. They always say the good teachers you remember. You always remember their names. The bad teachers you remember too, but I don't remember their names. So I never wanted to be a bad teacher. I wanted the kids to remember me, not knowing at that time that I would be a teacher. And and church was always important to me. I have here, I remember at the age of 11 or 12, that was when we could be baptized. I took seriously the teaching of my Sunday school and BTU teachers, and can vividly recall to this day that aura that surrounded my baptism, because we were taught that was important as children, and how and what it would do, what you had to do as a result of it, as to become a Christian. And being a shy, quiet, middle child with a mild speech impediment, I had to make up the differences. So I did what I had to do. I continued to read, I continued to write in my own little childlike fashion. And I was an irritant as I grew up. I was an irritant to siblings and friends about doing the right thing and following the rules. And I'm sure I irritate people today. But it's just one of those things. I feel that I need a balance. I was born in October, by the way. And those of you who were born in October, we feel that we need a balance in our life. And that's what I felt about myself. I needed balance. And that's why when I decided that, my mother always said, I think you'll make a good teacher. And I always said to myself, no, not. I wanted to be in the corporate world. I wanted to be in business. And so I got my undergraduate degree in business. And when I moved to Washington, D.C., I became involved in a lot of things there. I went to Howard University to get my credentials going for teaching, because there was a period of time when the reading level for high school kids was about 4th grade. And that balance wasn't there. When you're in high school, you need to be reading not at 4th grade. But those were the times. And so I got involved in it, so I went to DC Teachers to become a teacher, kind of late in my life. But that was my mother's dream. Not mine, but my mother's. But mothers have a way of knowing. And I love teaching. And anyone who knows me know that I love teaching. I don't want to be here long because I know we have to move on. But I just wanted to say that as the years rolled by, I got through many of my milestones, surmounted personal struggles and those of living through segregation and the inequalities it offered. And when it comes to the community, I moved here with my husband, after we were married. he came here looking for a job, and I was in Washington D.C. And when I worked for the State Department, I worked for the Navy Department, and I worked for the Peace Corps. So I've been around a long time, and I thank God for that, because the church has always been important to me. Wherever I would go, I would always find a church and become united with that body. And so when I came here and I started teaching elementary kindergarten, and it was through the children that I knew I had found where I needed to be. And after 33 to 32 years of teaching in Portsmouth, I knew right away that the novelty and excitement of teaching had not worn off. So I went on the road as an artist in residence. And I have my dear friend here who knows me. I've had 2 of her children in school. And after so many years, we're still friends. A few years before I retired, I wrote a play called Listen to the Drum, a tribute to Harriet Tubman. And it gave me the opportunity, it gives me the opportunity to be in the classroom working with children. And some people say, well, why do you do that? And I say, because of the era that we're living, most of the schools where I teach are predominantly white. And every once in a while, I see a black child. And that black child can see me. Someone that looks like him. And I feel a connection. So that's why, even at my age, I'm still subbing or serving as an artist in residence. My goal is to advocate for those children who don't shine a lot of times, and for those who do shine and want to move to the next step. Because children are children. And if you don't love children, don't teach. That's what I used to say to kids who come to my young teachers who would come as student teachers. You have to love children. Otherwise, you're a fraud. You have to love them and respect them. I was bullied, and I know what bullying is in all shapes and forms. And you find it everywhere. So my heart goes out to that child who is bullied. That child who, because of the color of his or her skin, is teased and called names. And do I jump on it? I do. Now, I'm just going to share one little thing before I end. This past week, I had we call it the swan song. And I did Listen to the Drums at Elliott Elementary School. And since December, we've been working together. And it starts in Africa. Who are those Africans? Someone brought this to church this morning. This is the coverage of the play. Look at those kids. What color are they? They're white. But they become, listen to the drums, they become the warriors, the dancers, the royal family. Harriet Tubman, Henry Box Brown. We started back in the 18th and 19th century, and we move up to the 21st century. And these kids, these little second graders, they don't read it from a paper. They learn it, and it's in their hearts. And if you were to read some of the comments of these children, second graders, and if you had the privilege of attending, this was our dress rehearsal, you would say, how can that be? because you learn so much from children. I don't feel myself great in any form. I just feel myself as an advocate for children and education. And so, in closing, I think of whenever I do drums, I think of this old African proverb. And usually it says, he who knows, but I'm going to substitute he for she, if you don't mind. She who knows and knows that she knows is wise, follow her. She who knows not and knows that she knows not is a child, teach her. She who knows not and knows not that she knows not is a child. Is a fool, shun them. It's still a child too. And so when I do that, I think about that last person who knows not. I need to teach them something. That's what I think. But sometimes you have to teach things through a certain mediums. And I go, my big ammunition, and that's prayer. I go to God in prayer. And every time I have a student that I have difficulty relating to, I pray. Because that's what I've learned in my life, that prayer changes things. And I know that. And a word for a woman of faith. And I found these words. A strong woman has faith that she is strong enough for the journey. But a woman of strength has faith that it is the journey, that it is in the journey, she will become strong in God's hand. Author unknown. Thank you.
Everybody's much shorter than I am. Can you hear me okay? Yes. So I'm Nadine Thompson. I'm sorry that I was a little late. I went to church for a little bit today, so I'm not going to blame it all on my husband, but that's another minister's wife. Anyway, I'm really honored and glad to be here today, and unlike the first two women that went before me who were ministers, I am not a minister. I am a minister's wife. So I'm not really sure. No, I won't say that either. But anyway, so Jerry-Ann asked me to share a little bit today about my journey, and I think it's an interesting one. What I was going to say about being a minister's wife is that I don't serve, or my husband does not serve in a traditional church. He is the pastor at Phillips Exeter Academy. I don't know if you're familiar with the academy in Exeter. And it's a high school that serves about 1,200 students, and he ministers to those students in an interfaith setting. So he ministers to students who are Muslim or Hindu or Christian or Buddhist or Jewish, and it's a really wonderful ministry. We live at the school, and so when I can, I get to church. I don't always get to church, but I do as much as I can. Church doesn't go on throughout the summer, so he's really fortunate to have great breaks, but it's not a traditional ministry as some other, can you hear me better now? Mm-hmm. It's not a traditional ministry, so unlike other ministers' wives who really kind of serve full-time with their husbands or who are right there on Sunday, it seems like at many traditional African American churches, church can go on all day and all evening, and the ministers' wives really have a very different role in that church. I was really fortunate, I guess, to be in a different ministry where Bob serves children, and it's a different type of setting. So it's very different than, for example, Florine's ministry that she shares with her husband. I am by training a social worker and now by profession an entrepreneur. And I've worked all my life really doing social work, whether it is part of what I did. I worked for a while at Phillips Exeter as the Dean of Multicultural Affairs. I worked in Manchester at the Child and Family Services there as a child and family therapist. I did some private work here and there, and then in the around 2000, I left social work in the traditional form and went on to do entrepreneurship. I started a company with a friend of mine called Warm Spirit, which really served first and foremost to empower women. And so my ministry and in my life has always been about women and the empowerment of women, and their spirituality and their spiritual life has always been a really key element for me, an important part of what I do as an entrepreneur. So it's not just about making money or selling your goods, it's really about your own spiritual growth and development. I think that one of the things that I wanted to share, a couple of things that I wanted to share. So I talked a little bit about Warm Spirit, and now, the company that I own called Soul Purpose, where women sell natural products. They're, skincare, bath and body items, women using the Avon model, where women sort of go from door to door and sell these products. And we've been doing this now for, it seems like, almost 20 years. So it's been quite a journey. And in that journey, I've had an opportunity to meet a lot of women from all different walks of life. Now, for example, I'm with a company that sells adult toys as well as bath and body. And one of the things that was really sort of eye-opening for me, going from sort of the very traditional party products to the ones that we sell now, is the whole issue of abuse and sexuality for women. And so it's really been important as we talk about women and we talk about their sex lives and we talk about their growth and development spiritually, the issues of abuse and how women heal and how they find God in their lives for that healing, I think is a really important and powerful thing. So it's really interesting, even if you're selling products, whether it's an adult toy, whether you're selling a shower gel and lotion, whether you're selling hair care or makeup, that women, there is this common bond of how we support each other in these parties, how we help each other heal, how that talking and that sharing of one's experience can really make a difference in their lives. I wanted to share a little bit personally about me and my journey spiritually. I think that's what Jerry Ann wanted me to share about. And it has been quite a journey for me, from starting off as a young woman growing up in Toronto. When I was in my early 20s, a lot of my friends started getting married. And one of the ways for girls from the Caribbean to meet nice men was to go to church. And so they went to church, and they'd always, get fixed up with some guy in the church and end up getting married. And I thought that was kind of very uncool. And so we'd have this debate about whether or not you meet a guy at a club on a Saturday night or whether you meet somebody at the church. Does it make a difference? I mean, I now have some wisdom and understand that probably meeting somebody in church is way better. So I'll concede to that. But I remember in my own rebelliousness that I thought that I didn't want to do it that way, didn't want it to be that obvious. And so I remember in that journey saying to myself and saying to God, I'm not sure what I want to do, I'm not sure if I'll get married, I'm not sure if I'll have children, but what I do know, what I want to do is God's will. And I'm not sure what that is, but if you show me your will, if you make it clear to me, I'll do it. And he has spoken to me in his own way, and what I've learned is listening to my own intuition as a woman, is that's where I hear God's voice, through that silence, through that calm, through my own faith. I've been able to hear his voice. When it was time for me to leave home, which was very comfortable, and move to the United States to go to school, it was God's voice. and God's guidance that allowed me to say, yes, I'll take that journey. When I met my husband here in Exeter and decided that I would leave Toronto and my family and move to New England, as crazy as that would be, that was for me a very spiritual and emotional choice. It wasn't anything that was logical or rational. It was really me saying, I'm open to your will, there's a journey here that I'm on, I need to be open to it. And often when I speak with women around the country, I often talk about that willingness to open yourself up to what God's will is in your life, though it may not always be clear. The last, I would say, 18 months of my life have probably been the most difficult period in my life. My children went from being sort of, crazy, typical adolescents into really crazy, out of their heads, teenagers and young adults. And often I think about myself as a clinician, and I think about how much I didn't understand what parents were going through when they would be sitting there and their child would be in trouble and they would be looking at you like a deer, in the headlights, just like totally overwhelmed by how these children that you've nurtured and fed and loved and cared for and talked to can turn out to be such idiots. And so the last 18 months of my life, I keep looking at these children and thinking, how did I get here with you guys, and how come you're living in my house with me? And I say this to them all the time. And it's really, up to this morning, I keep saying to myself, how did we get here? And it's really, you mentioned about the journey. And part of it for me is not knowing and really trying to understand what God's will is. Just to give you a little snippet of that, our son got into a tremendous amount of trouble. And as I listened to him and as I tried to understand what was going on, I realized that the more I tried to understand, the less I knew. The less I knew this person who was growing and evolving into a young man, the more I thought about it, the less I knew this person. But interestingly enough, what I do rely on is his spirit and what I know of this beautiful boy that I love so much. I rely on that in my relationship to him. And again, that's my spiritual piece. I rely on the piece of him that God makes evident to me every time I speak to him, every time I look to him. I look for the God in his voice, in his eyes, in the person that I know. But just a lesson about that journey is that we had to move out of our home because of our son this summer. And it was a very, very difficult move. And I remember in the house that we were in before, though I liked the house, I always felt like we were in a fishbowl. And I always felt like we didn't have the privacy that we needed. But I had this very beautiful garden that I had come to love that was around the house. Isaiah got into a lot of trouble. We had to move. My husband, worked things out. We were able to move into a new home. And it was devastating for our family to have to move. The way the school responded felt really odd to me. I ended up losing a lot, particularly this garden that I had nurtured for the past 12 years of my life. I had put so much of my energy into that garden, and the whole thing was plowed away before I had a chance to move it. So it was a terrible, terrible move. But I kept praying and I kept asking God, what's the lesson here? Clearly you have a plan. Clearly this must be your will. I'm packing it up. I'm trying to move. I'm trying to get from one place to the other, trying to keep the whole family together, trying to not kill each other in the midst of this. There must be a reason. And we got to this house, and it wasn't like our old house. It wasn't as pretty. It wasn't as wide. It wasn't what we had before. But again, intuitively, God said to me, you can make a home here, and it'll be a better home than you had before. And it was really interesting because in the midst of that, as we settled in this Christmas for our first Christmas in that home, it felt much better. It was a healing place. It's a beautiful little house surrounded by trees. And it's a place where many of our friends have come to heal, to talk, to be. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful sort of healing kind of retreat for us as a family, a place for our children to heal. We had our first grandchild that was born there just 3 months ago, who's been the light of our life. So as I remember raising these two children and thinking, we adopted our children, and I thought, here's a social worker and a minister. We're going to give these children a beautiful home and education and love so that our daughter won't be your stereotypical black single mother. She'll go to Brown and she'll, get out of school and be some wonderful designer or whatever. She'll be a doctor, lawyer, whatever. And our son will go off and play lacrosse at some top college and do great things. And then I'm looking at them, and she's a single mother, and he's being charged with, I don't even want to get into it. And I said, how did we get here? How did we get here as a family? Was this God's will? But as Camilla's baby was born and we have this beautiful grandson in our lives, I think, okay, whenever this baby smiles at me, I think, okay, I see your will, God. I see what you had in mind for us here as a family as we hold this little 3-month-old, and he brings so much joy to our home. And as our son is off right now, healing and getting better, I see the opportunity for him to heal wounds that he came into our family with. That God has provided a family for him where he can grow and where he can heal and where he can come to terms with who he is as a man. So I think being here in New England and thinking about this whole journey, all I want to say is that probably most of the black women who are in this community are not fully here by choice. Many of us have come here through marriage. Many of us have come here as slaves for generations, but many of us have made a home here. And I think that the journey has always been an interesting one. New Hampshire has been an interesting place for us to heal. We don't get to see each other much. We don't get to run to each other at the grocery store or at the hair salon. It's really a challenge to get your hair done in New Hampshire. But we find a way. Those of us who know each other love and really are always happy to see each other. But our ministry really involves our white sisters as well. It's not a ministry just of black women. I have found that in my life here in New Hampshire, one thing that has been really clear to me spiritually, that my sisters are just not black women, but they are the white women that I've met here who have been my sisters in the journey, who have held my hand, who have been able to be at that other end of the phone when things seem to be falling apart. It's really been a journey, and I think for many of us black women in New Hampshire, I think we've had to lean on other women spiritually, not just the black women, because if you were going to just lean on black women, we'd have to lean really far to touch one on a Sunday morning. So it's really hard. So I just wanted to end with two things. One is a gift someone gave me about, how long ago was 2005? 10 years ago, 11 years ago. So 11 years ago, when I was running Warm Spirit, one of my sales reps gave me this book, Prayers for a Women's Soul. And it was down in our basement for all these years, and I had never opened the gift. And just as we were moving and I was downstairs cleaning out the basement, I found it. And I found it just at the time that my son was in a deep amount of trouble and my daughter was fully pregnant. And I thought, how did I get here? And I didn't know how I was going to get through every day. And so I said, let me take that book upstairs and put it beside my bed. And I made a commitment to myself that even if I wasn't going to be at church every day or every Sunday, that I at least would have a spiritual life through prayer. And this book has really made a difference for me, and I just wanted to share that with all of you as we talk about spirituality today. And I actually found the woman who gave it to me on Facebook a few weeks ago and wrote her a very long letter that she'd given me this gift back in 2005, and I had just opened it, and what a tremendous gift it was to me. So that made me feel really good, and she actually responded and had remembered buying it for me. And then this morning, I showed up at church late like usual. And this is Bob's church. We were on our way to come up here, and one of the mothers, interestingly enough, a black woman, was sharing about her journey and sharing about the things that give her strength. And she quoted a proverb, which is one that I really like, but one that makes a lot of sense to me right now. And it's ironic because it's about trusting and having faith even though you don't understand. And that to me is what's so ironic about faith, is that you have to trust in God, you have to believe even though you don't understand. And I can tell you, I don't understand half of what's happening to me, but I keep believing that this is part of the journey and it's going to make sense. And so even in just showing up for the last 20 minutes of the service today, I was able to get something from it. I thought it was just so interesting that she stood up and shared. Of course, this is at 1:30 when I should have been in the car on the way up here. And I'm like, Bob, why can't you cut this? Why do we have to say all 4 verses and you know we're late? But that's another conversation. We could have done like in the Catholic Church verses 1 and 2 and then goodbye. No, we had to do all 4. But yet I'm the controlling one. Okay. So the one that she shared today was trusting God when I don't understand. And she shared part of Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. And that to me just really kind of speaks to where I am right now, is just really trusting and hoping that my path will be straight, and that by doing the right thing, having some trust, though I don't understand, I do believe that the future is going to be better. So thank you.
I'd like to say thank you to all of our panelists. We have some very interesting things to say and for us to listen to hear. So at this point, I'd like to open the gathering here up for questions, and we could ask questions of the entire panel, or maybe you have some specific question you'd like to direct to a certain panelist. Just let it be known who you'd like to address, and we can go from there. So, anybody? Reverend Hilson.
Well, I'm wondering how it is that a young woman who is not only pastor, but is the wife of a pastor, and how you survive that duel. There's only one up there like that, you know.
It is true. It is interesting. I was talking with your lovely wife about parenthood and not having a minister's wife, not having a preacher's wife, and so it is interesting to be a preacher and a preacher's wife. Luckily, my husband and I share a lot. The reality of it is that gender expectations rear their heads significantly. So when things hit the fan, when things get crazy, I'm more likely to be the person who goes and picks up the kids from school and things like that. And it's interesting, only in that I'm grateful that when it really comes to a head, and I say there's something in my ministry that wants to be called forward, we need to readjust so that it can be called forward. Chris hears that, and we readjust so that it can. So, yes, gender roles, gender expectations are ever present, and yes, I have a sweet man with whom I serve.
In the back, and then you, Angela, we'll take the one in the back there.
First of all, I'd like to thank the panel, and Minister Hilson, you have a testimony, and although you like to be in the background, I think you're a wonderful speaker, and Mrs. Edwards, the same thing. I want to talk specifically about the Black church and women's role historically and where we are now, because what we do really well is organize, and even during the civil rights movement of the 60s, we organized the Men Speak. We have a new civil rights movement. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, not too far from Ferguson. So we have Tracy Blackman. What I'm seeing is not your mama's civil rights movement anymore. So we have more women speaking, in fact, Black Lives Matter co-founders are women, and so we're seeing women take on a different role. What I'm interested in is knowing, and Pastor Smith, because you're speaking about the homophobia, gender roles, but for everyone, what do you see the role of women being, and how are women perceived in the Black church? And this is generally. I know I've worked with a lot of survivors of both sexual and physical abuse who are women. And sometimes, although we say go to the church to find a husband, that's not always the best place to find a husband. and so then I would say, well, let me work with where you are. Because the church is not necessarily the first place I would tell a person to go for support. I've been in church, I'm a preacher's kid too, but it's not the first place, because work it out with your husband, go to the pastor for counseling. But we know it's not a good idea necessarily to have couples counseling when he's beating you, right? That's what I know, that's my training. And in those cases I would hear, sometimes the abuser was the pastor of the church, and they would show up at these hearings. And it's very hard because, again, it's the place we go, it's our safe place, the church. It's what we know, it's our family. It's the hub of our political activity, where liberation movements, social justice movements, happen. And it's always that constant, for me, kind of being loyal, and also being able to call out and say, what are we doing now? Are we getting folks help in domestic violence? Are we saying, well, your husband leads you, and as long as he's following God, So how do, I don't know, just speaking if I'm being clear about what I'm asking. What do you think how is that being handled in the church now? Just addressing those issues.
You're asking, like, people coming to the church, with issues, how is it being dealt with?
Or what is the messaging we're getting from, like, the pulpit? Like, I'm just going back to you, Pastor Smith. You go to church and you hear certain things. So, say if you're a pro-choice person, you hear certain things from the pulpit, like, oh, well, maybe I'm not welcome at this church. Or homophobic remarks, no, I'm not welcome to. Or you're told that you should obey your husband, for instance, but you're getting beat. I'm just saying, I'm trying to make it as. So, what is the messaging, because I haven't been in church in a while, but what is the messaging that the church is giving? I know UCC, because that's traditionally a more liberal kind of and progressive church, and at the same, like I go there and I say, okay, but it's predominantly white, and I still like the singing of the Black church. I still like the call and response of the Black church. So I don't always feel, comfortable. But I'm just wondering, maybe I know it's an issue, but maybe it's not something.
Is your question, what is our experience, their experience around gender in Black churches now as opposed to maybe 30 years ago? Or where are we now?
Yes. Are those issues even being addressed? So if you have a Women's Day, do you have workshops on if you're in a domestic violence relationship? I mean, are those like things that come up? It's stuff we didn't talk about when I was in church.
I don't know if I can answer this. Now, I think I'm the oldest up here. Been around a long time. And I've been in church just about all my life. And I've seen a lot of things go on in church that shouldn't go on in church. And sometimes you get the message from the pulpit, do as I say, don't do as I do, that kind of thing. I think a lot of, since when I was young growing up in church was a focal point, especially in the segregated community, because that's what we went to church as young people to socialize, and then we would go take these trips to other churches, and so sometimes by my father being a minister, and I grew up in that in that milieu. So as a result, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect situation. Ministers are human beings, like everyone else, and their families. But back in the days when I was growing up, the church family stood out like you had to be the perfect family almost. Your daughter made a mistake or something like that. They you can't do that. That can't happen. You're one of God's spokespersons. But let's be real. We are people, and people make mistakes. But the thing of it is with reference to what you're saying, is that back in those days we didn't have things weren't told to us a lot. A lot of things were kind of like pushed under the rug. And as you grow up and you mature, then you kind of wonder why. And I was interested in what you had to say and in your journey and the things that's happening in your life. And sometimes we're really hurt by those things, and we don't know what to do. And when you see a difference between what the pastor says and what the pastor does, and the deacons and all that kind of stuff, I mean, all kinds of stuff can go on in church, and I can tell you, because I come from way back when. But there's some good things in church, because if you have a minister who is truly of God, he's not going to be perfect, but he's going to love his congregation. And now that we have women in the congregation, and I used to think all along when I was a little kid, well, why can't a woman be in the pulpit? But it was a no-no then. But see, God has a way of bringing about things in a way that we don't always understand, because we don't always understand God's way. And so that's why we need prayer. That's why we need to come together as a people and know spiritually that if you believe, if you have faith, that faith will take you a long way. And it has brought me a long way. And so, yes, I think I know what you're saying, but you just have to keep on keeping on, as my grandmother used to say. Keep on keeping on, because this world is not the world that I grew up in. And I see a lot of things that's happening. But on the other side, I think God is still, there's a song that I wrote, He watches over me. And He does watch over us. Thank you.
I would say the cultural ground shift that's happened around the visibility of domestic violence, sexual violence that affects children. I feel like the level of awareness and outspokenness around those issues we have grown in our awareness and in the skillfulness of our response. And so I think that growth has happened in many churches as well. There's a lot that needs to happen in society at large, in churches. I mean, we need to be on the forefront in protecting our most vulnerable folks, and in skillful pastoral ministry to people who are experiencing violence. So we're growing and learning. But frankly, we don't get a whole lot of training. So yes, we're growing. Yes, there's a lot to do. And the shift has happened in churches just as it has in society at large.
I think Angela,
first, I really want to appreciate all of you for the way in which you so courageously shared your stories and how deeply it touched me, and I'm sure everyone here. And in particular, Ms. Thompson, I'm struggling with my own idiot children. You know, I think about your story and how much I identified as you talked about being an adoptive parent, which I am myself. And how did I get here? This wasn't what I was imagining it was going to be, you know. So we share these struggles in common, and I just appreciate the courage with which you all shared your stories. So I want to circle back to this question of faith, and I'm one of the tour guides for the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail, and I'm so drawn into the story of faith that generationally is present in the Black community in America, and how impressed I am by that, because I don't know that I have that faith that lives in me. And so I guess a little of what you all shared spoke to that at your core, but I'm wondering how you hold that center. That's one question I have. And then the other question I have is, how do we take these conversations to a broader scale and integrate the conversations across our community so that all our lives change for the better, whether it's a woman, a man, a person of color or not? You know, how do we take these conversations and elevate them in some sort of different contemporary construct that is going to share that faith and belief? So the first question, though, what is that source of faith you tapped into that I am so impressed by?
Well, for me, like I said, it started as it was a safe place for me. When I read scripture, I don't just read words, but I read and then I look at it to see, how does this apply to me? How is this going to make me a better person? And as a result, there are times that had Florine reacted to a situation, it wouldn't have been nice. But as the faith person, I took that time to count and to respond in a way that I would want someone to respond to me. As far as getting to the question over here, as far as doing things within the church on Women's Day to relate to women's issues, I know that we don't do that necessarily at New Hope. Now, there was a play that was done that sort of hinted, but as far as having workshops, I've found that I've had to go to larger venues like the Woman of Faith Conference, and then they have workshops, they have things that deal with the issues that we as women don't necessarily want to talk about or afraid to talk about. You know, do I stay with my husband that's beating me? You know, those things. The church will say you stay with him because to death do us part. You know, but he also says, whom God has joined together, let no man put asunder. So if God didn't join you, I feel you can say goodbye. But the faith is just, it's a belief. You just have to truly believe that there is someone that's greater than you and I, that has you in the palm of their hands and that can give you that peace, that love that no one else can give you. There's this time that there's a joy. Like I look at this baby, you know, we can't do that's God, and that's where my faith comes in. It's that's it. It's simple. I want it to be complicated, but it isn't. It's simple. It's just that belief that there is someone greater than you and I.
Is there a question over here?
Yeah.
And then in the back.
First of all, thank you all very much for sharing. I want to go back to something that Reverend Lawrence said early in your presentation about the church being central, the center of community in the black community. My mother grew up Southern Baptist in southern Missouri, and her whole childhood, she was white, her whole childhood was based around the church. And the way she describes it, my father was the son of a Methodist minister also in Missouri, and his whole childhood, obviously because his father's minister, was based around the church. With my mother, it was her social life, her et cetera. It's Thursday night, Wednesday night, all day Sunday, et cetera. It sounds like that is normal in a small town, white or black. I have a lot of respect for, in the black community, a church very clearly possibly provides more safety, as Mrs. Hill said. Related to. But I'm wondering how much might have to do with geopolitical or demographics in terms of what role a church plays in a community. Do any of you have feelings, especially of those of you who grew up in churches in the South compared to churches in the North, have a sense that there's stronger attachment of community in a smaller town than in a larger area, or maybe 30 years ago, 40, 50, as opposed to now? Is that the evolution, or really is a lot of it based on just churches are stronger in black communities than in white? I don't know.
I just sort of think about the state of black communities 50 years ago. You know, where do you learn civic engagement? Where do you sort of step into leadership? The realms, the sort of social realms in which there were opportunities were much more limited 50 years ago than they were today. So many people got their sort of training as leaders in the church, sort of so to become civic leaders, to become religious leaders, to become sort of so much of that was in churches because it was a place of assembly, and many of those just weren't open. So I think that part of the role of the black church in black communities has to do with, part of it has to do with sort of the faith and traditions themselves, and part of them has to do with the social context in which they were set. So in that way, there's a racial component. And I can say for myself, I grew up in two predominantly white communities. It was interesting hearing what you were saying about sort of race and being less inclined to think about race and faith. But for me, having grown up in Northern California, I so cherish the identity formation that happened for me in church, in my grandmother's church. Like, I have an understanding of who I am in black community because of that place. And it isn't that so I just learned a significant part of who I am as a black woman, as a black person in that community. And so I just wanted to say that out loud because it meant so much to me. And I do remember, this sort of veers off, but I remember going back at another Thanksgiving and walking in and having a man come up to me with sort of tears in his eyes and looking at me and said, "I came up with your father. He would be proud of you." And my father had died when I was 9 years old. I didn't remember him. But this man held that memory for me. There's a long history of familial sort of fracturing in black communities, and there's a way of sort of sistering and brothering and fathering and mothering and aunting and uncling and loving one another in black churches that is precious. So I don't know. It's a long answer.
I just like to add, piggyback on what you were saying. Like in the black church, we had mothers of the church, even though women were not allowed to take on these big, administrative roles or be the pastor. But we had mothers of the church and deaconesses of the church, and they were older women who had had a lot in their own lives. And that's who we went to, and that's what you learn from them. And Mrs. Hilson mentioned about being a safe place. Yes, because with reference, because I think you were in Connecticut, and I was in the southern town where it's a little bit different. But the point is, church was a safe place. Church was a place where you could go and feel that. You were worth something, because when you got up in that segregated town and you had to sit on you had to sit in the back of the bus, or you couldn't go and eat in a restaurant. You couldn't go to if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to find some place where that blacks could go. All of these things had this toll. It took its toll on us, and when in conversation with other my friends. It's the same thing. We got our beginning in the church. The church was strong. This church is not as strong now as it was then, because some of the things have been taken away. But the point of it is that I will always believe that the church is the mainstay. It is well for me, because when she said this, feeling safe, But now we can't feel safe because people come in churches and shoot you up, as well as schools. So, the point of it is that you need something to hold on to, and then how you grow up, and Lauren, what you had to say, I can identify with that. even though we're, our faiths are different. And when I say faith, not our faith, but how we believe is different. We all should be as one, and as we what we bring to the table, what we bring to life into this world, has a lot to do, I think, with our spiritual being.
Yes, there's one question in the back.
This is more of a comment, and maybe
Comment,
it's
sure.
gratuitous, but looking backward, because I read a book that Valerie Cunningham wrote. She can't be here today. I guess she's not feeling well. But there was a fascinating footnote, and I'll just talk about it because at first I thought it was a typo. I was down with Ernest and said, this can't be right. Can it be true that the Catholic bishop in Portsmouth and in Maine and New Hampshire from 1875 until 1900 was an African American who was born a slave in Georgia? This has got to be a typo. Yes, indeed, it's true. I just find that to be an amazing story. His younger brother was the first president of Georgetown University. But then when you get into the role of the African American women in faith and in church, I'm just kind of riffing on what I know, having lived in West Africa as a Fulbright, and I was your husband's last maid in Exeter, so I haven't talked to you afterwards. But I'm just thinking about the tradition, the African spirituality that was brought to this country, and then the unbelievable experience of the Africans here that was such a gift and kind of a great river that added to our Christianity and to our whole culture, both in music and in faith. And the role of women as preachers. I mean, you remember, of course, one of you has written a book about Harriet Tubman, and then Sojourner Truth, and these great orators, and they brought their speaking and their preaching and their testifying, and even remember the movie Glory of the woman preacher, even before the end of the Civil War, and the unbelievable strength of her role. This, I'm sure that character was based on real women. We see them in cities, women who start their own congregations. So I'm just thinking about the past and how it continues to bless us and inform us. And God knows we need it, because when you think about the Unitarian Universalist tradition of all the faiths, and with the religious tolerance that we're now kind of dealing with in our country, the religious intolerance, what a role that could continue to play in helping all of us from just falling apart, really. Thank you. Sorry, I just kind of ran my mouth.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you for your comment, Brother Moses.
It's interesting in so many ways, and to my sister who raised that concern about what the church is doing. A couple of things. Let me say this. As Dr. King once said, that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in our communities. White folk go to white churches. Black folk go to black churches, serving the same God. And it was a church that when people who would burn the cross think about Christ, it makes you wonder. The black church, and I'll say this, the black church has been sexist. It's also been a place that has segregated by social status. An example, we think about Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where Dr. King was a pastor. We don't think about the church that took great pride in having lawyers and teachers and doctors, but who shut the door on sharecroppers in Montgomery, Alabama. We don't think about the man who preceded Martin, by the name of Vernon Johns, who tried to break down segregation in Montgomery. The black church threw him out because he tried to break down the barriers. And they said, he's a bright man, but we need someone young. Let's find someone just as intelligent and bring him in. They brought in Martin Luther King, who picked up where Vernon had began. And in terms of the church providing a need for those issues, most black churches in New England are small, don't have resources. And what we do, for example, next month, we'll bring together churches from 3 states. I happen to be the president for 3 states. And in that place, we have classes. We address issues of women and other things. Then in July, we bring all the churches together for an annual convention, setting aside teaching time to address social issues in our community. In coming together, we find some strength. It's difficult for small churches to have the resources and address the kinds of ills that need to be addressed. And I said the black church was sexist. We hear about Martin. We hear about Malcolm. We hear about Medgar Evers. We didn't hear about Murdy Evers and Betty Shabazz and Coretta Scott King until later, because we kept the women in their place. Didn't hear about Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer. Ella Baker, the power behind SCLC. Ella Baker, who brought that whole group together on SNCC, SNCC, a black woman, kept in the background. The black church has been sexist, it has classism, and still has a way to go. But I come by faith, as my brother does, believing that the day shall come, if we will stand up and work together, we can break down the barriers that divide us. There's but one God, one faith, and one baptism. And I'd love to talk to you about those things. Okay?
And Pastor, if I have Pastor, like, I think when I say classes, that was just but I'm talking about what actually comes from the pulpit. And I think you're doing that then every Sunday. I mean, it doesn't have to be you have to set up a class, you don't need extra resources. It's what people hear in the congregation, and they would be hearing the right thing from you, I would assume. You wouldn't say if somebody's doing this, if it's the messages women get about, and I'm glad you brought up the class issue, and black respectability is a whole nother, I'm sorry. I got more water, but okay, I hear you.
I would hope that all those here who are members will say that I do across the pulpit address the issues. And I tell them I'm trying to preach the hell out of them.
Jerry Ann.
So I just have a quick kind of summary kind of question to ask, and I'm going to just read this. This is it's a recent Pew Religious Landscape Survey, and it said that African Americans are more likely than any other ethnic or racial group to belong to a formal religious group. Of the people who were questioned, 85% of them, larger than any other group, responded that they were affiliated with a church or the other. And I'm wondering, what is it about our society, our communities, our groups, where there's just, I mean, it's really odd to just pick out one segment of the society that is so religious, and yet there is so much contradiction within the church. But what that says to me that church is offering something to this group that they're not getting outside of that community. So I want to ask the group what they think that is. And Reverend Smith, you mentioned a little bit that even in your church, you battle with the invisibility of self. And we hear a lot of the women speaking about being quiet and reserved and in the background. And so I'm wondering what part then of your identity is left out of the church?
I would say two things. One, I'm a naturally more reserved person than my husband. If you've ever, some people have met my husband, some people haven't. He's a big personality, and I cherish him. It's lovely. I appreciate it actually because it means that some of that is required in ministry. Sometimes a church is carried by sort of the sheer kind of exuberant energy and passion and vision of its minister. We both have vision and passion, but sometimes it needs to just be very visible so people can hang on to it and go. And I appreciate that sometimes he gets to be that kind of Energizer bunny. But I am a more sort of reserved person. We're a little yin yang. I'm a little more yin. So let's see. You talked about invisibility. I think we have sort of culturally across the board in many different settings. We have sometimes lift up kind of race blindness as a virtue, and I think in an era where to see blackness, for example, was to see something that was problematic, to say, I don't see black or white or Asian or gender, I just see a person, I can see that would be opening, in a certain moment. But to me, I want to be seen, I need to be seen as a black woman as if that isn't a problem. You know what I'm saying? So race blindness to me, I'm looking for something that's kind of a step past that. And I think that where we live in my congregation overall, there's a lot of, we reside in that kind of race blind moment as an ideal. I'm so sorry. There's so much in all of this conversation that it's hard to be kind of on point about it, frankly. Ask me your question again. The point about it.
Basically, just what does the church offer us while we are flocking to the church as a community that our outside community is not? There has to be something in our society. I mean, Royaline mentioned a safe place.
Yeah. Here's what I would have to say. My favorite sermon I've ever preached comes out of something that's deep and beautiful and powerful in black churches and in black community that I cherish. It was called Whole, Unbroken, and it drew from Zora Neale Hurston, who had just amazing things to say, and June Jordan, and lots of sort of writers and thinkers that I cherish. And one of the things that I love about the faith that emerges out of black communities is that, we get fragmented in life, we get broken apart, but I feel like there's something in faith that's expressed in black communities that's about touching down into our fundamental human wholeness, and that's so core to sort of the spirituality of black churches. It's in a lot of places, but it's so deep in black churches because we have been historically our families, our identity has been so torn apart that I love that part of what black churches offer in song, in that direct sort of contact with the holy that is a reminder that there is something inviolably whole in us. And I think that draws me.
Sojourner Truth, I think she did Ain't I a Black Woman? Mm-hmm. If any of you have ever read that. And when I was doing the Ain't I a Woman? Sometimes things get mixed up there. But Ain't I a Woman? And when I was doing my research, when I was writing, listen to the drums, and I identified with Sojourner Truth, with Harriet Tubman, a lot of the other women, and I put some of them in my play because I want children to get there was a strength there, in Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, and they were living at a time when it was most not a good time for us as black people, and certainly black women, but they made it, and so I tried to identify with their courage, their feeling of, like Harriet Tubman. I'm going to go back and bring some people out of slavery, because slavery, she said, I hate it to its very core. And so as a result, as we have come along through the years, those of us in this century, and if we could just look back, I think that's why it's important for these kids to learn this, and they have wonderful white teachers who teach it. So we have to sometimes not think of, you know, we have to look past the color many times. Because when I see these little kids dumbfounded because somebody owned another person, you know, in their little mind, how can they understand that? And I see the white teachers, and I'm not saying all white teachers do this stuff, but the ones that who have me back more than one time, and I see that there's a connection. So we need each other. So, but as black women, you know, I think there's something kind of special about us from the standpoint that what we've had to go through our lives, it strengthens you. It's like the journey. What strengthens you? A lot of times, it's the things that you have to go through. And I feel that as a black woman, living in a predominantly black state of New Hampshire for over 40-some years, I kind of think of it as my home. What did I say? Oh, well, maybe one day. We all do that, right? You know what I meant. Thank you. As I said, sometimes things go wrong up there.
I don't have much to add. I mean, I think to your question, Jerry Ann, it seems to me that, you know, probably the obvious is that the black church, I mean, I think, you know, my day-to-day experience working in an office where you're surrounded by white people, and, you know, I think in this day and age of political correctness, they do the colorblind thing where I don't see the black, I just see a person. There's so much of who we are that's sort of shut down and uncommunicated and uncelebrated and quieted and hushed throughout the day. You know, studying to be a clinician, I remember they said black marriages are the hardest to deal with, and when you talk about why sometimes, you know, there's interracial couples have it harder, because it's really hard for two people to come home who've been dealing with racism on all different levels all day to come home and have to deal with it and process it at night. I think that the black church seems to provide, I mean, the times that I've gone to the AME church with Bob, I can understand why people are there. There's a sense of community. If the minister delivers a powerful sermon that you can identify with, the music that can sometimes lead you to tears in unexpected ways provides that release and that sense of calm and support, and you know, you feel like God's given you some renewal to get back out and deal with the rest of the world from Monday through Saturday. And so I think, what would life be like for us as black women or black people if we didn't have the church? We would probably go crazy, and I don't think that there's enough therapists in this world to provide what church seems to provide for people on a Sunday morning. And so I think it is really critical, and I think when that shooting happened in the AME church a few months ago, for me, I guess being married to an AME minister, but also understanding the power of the black church, that seemed like such a violation of something that was so important and central in our lives, making something, a place that seemed like the safest place in America to be, you know, now violated, to me really, I think, is something that we need to talk about in our communities a little bit more. That was such a violation of something so sacred to me. But I think the black church really provides the therapy, the support, the decrease of isolation. It provides so much for us that I don't think we would be able to survive as a community without it.
I say amen to that.
Okay, we have just one last question, and I think it's about time to close it up. And I understand Reverend Thompson is going to favor us with a song which will close the day. So after your question, please.
Thank you. I think this is more like a little comment. I've just been sitting here processing my own experience in a small white church in Exeter growing up and trying to answer Jerry's question. And I remember in that church, the ministers that I grew up with were really comfortable and confident about preaching God the Father. And I remember feeling like I got to know who God the Father was very well. And so the rub came when the mothers in the church wanted to do things like serve communion when only male deacons could serve communion. That ended up being the issue moments. And I was thinking that when did my faith recognize that there was something more than a gender issue that was at stake for me as a person growing up in a small white church, whether I could do something or not in the church because I was a woman and not a man, was during the 60s when all of a sudden our wonderful preacher, who had always talked to us about God, the Father, invited a group of black men and women to come up from Lower Manhattan and spend an evening sharing jazz music with us, telling us their faith stories. And all of a sudden, I learned about Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, whose whole message was not just about how women should be equal to men, but how children ought to have a light on them, about just turning the whole world upside down so that all things were equal and all things could be deeply human. And I was just wondering in this moment whether one of the gifts of the black church was knowing Jesus really, really well and holding up the humanity that Jesus gave us, and knowing Jesus before you know only the Father. Because the Father was very academic to me, and Jesus made me understand that it was the issue of how to be a human being and not just whether I was a male or a female. And that power released something in me as a 13-year-old that I had never experienced in the church before. And I don't know whether that's why black churches are fuller, because they know Jesus, who deals with the whole human person, and not just creation or providence. And so I just wanted to offer that as what my experience was growing up in New Hampshire in an all-white community.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. And Reverend Thompson, if you would, please.
So it's really hard as a preacher to not respond to all of these things. It's really hard. There's so much that I want to say. I can answer every one of your questions, and we could have lunch or dinner and then go through next week. I could really do that. So I had the privilege of pastoring not a typical church, and today there was a special brunch at the dining hall, so the membership was even lower. The attendance was smaller than it is normally. And we sang a song that was a favorite of mine growing up, and we sang it around the piano. We had so few, we could just kind of gather around the piano and sing together. And I was surprised that no one else, apart from me, had ever sung this song. And there were other black folks there. So I'm thinking, you know what? You never sang this song? When Jerry Ann asked if I would sing, this is just what's on my mind. And there are 3 verses. But I'm just going to sing one. Just to show my wife that I can. I am weak and I need thy strength and power to help me thy light to see. Oh, lead me, oh Lord, lead me, and guide me along the way. For if you lead me, I cannot stray. Lord, let me walk each day with thee. Lead me, O Lord, lead me.
Thank you, Reverend Johnson. Thank you to our panel, and thanks to all of you for coming out on this cold afternoon.
And happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah, once I get going, okay. This is right over there.